Okay. So most, but not all, everybody took the exam. There are a few left over for different reasons, and the ones that did grades are a bit waiting because of struggling with some handwriting here and there. But well, things. Today we are talking about quad trees mostly, and then we'll switch into modeling, which might be one of the least popular topics, but important, worth mentioning, and I'll try to make it as fun as possible, given that it's still modeling. We will have to talk about bases, at the same time to talk about derivatives and weight functions, but it will all make sense, I hope. Before that, any questions?
Who do you think wins the college basketball game tonight? Florida and Houston? Florida versus Houston, who wins?
I don't know. I lost interest when there were two teams that I was in favor of, and neither made it. So I lost interest. Of course, I'm much more curious if how far Denver will make it in the playoff. Yeah. So we mentioned quad trees as a data structure to store a bunch of objects, and in this example, these objects are just points. And so we have data points A, B, C, D, E, F. We talked about doing point location. We just ask for a given query point. Am I lying on exactly one of the data points or not? Which essentially said I have the X, Y, or X, Y, Z coordinates of the query point. I look at the root, and am I inside the root? If I'm inside the root, then if I'm outside the root, then of course my query point doesn't coincide with any data points. If my query point is inside the region of the root, then I'll propagate the query to all my 4 children, and each one will have to find is Q inside its region or not. Once again, it's not my responsibility to decide which of my children contains Q. The moment that I decided that it's in my kingdom, in my region, Q lies, then I'll just propagate the query to all my 4 children. So it makes the code significantly simpler. Now I want to show that, or we went through this example that showed how I report all the points inside A. This time it would be a query region, much more relevant. Instead of just a query point, it's a whole region, for example, center and region around it. Now in the slider I'll use disk to visualize the query. Practically, it's much easier to answer a query when the query itself is also an axis parallel rectangle or axis parallel box in 3D or 4D. Just for visualization, I'll do it as a list. So once again, the main cases that I have to ask is, if my query point is completely outside the region of V, then no points of the region of V is inside Q. If the region of V is fully inside Q, then about the subtree of V, no question asked. Every point that is inside the subtree rooted at V is also inside the query. And if the query partially overlap the region of a node V, then I cannot decide. Then if V is a leaf, now I have subcases. If V is a leaf, I just check the single point in V, like the, or like A over here? Are you inside the query disk or not? Or more generally, V is not a leaf, it's internal node. Let's say this is V or this is V or the root is V. And in this case, once again, I propagate the query to all my 4 children. The same query disk, but all my 4 children needs now to handle the same query. And in this way, I can print all the points if I want to have the exact data, who are the players in this region. Or I can say that every node V or if I want to aggregate data, like to know inside the query disk, how many players are there, because I want to decide if it's occupied or partially occupied or not occupied at all, what I'll do is every node V will be augmented. There's an important word here, augmented, because if you check CLRS, the textbook, you'll see a whole chapter about augmenting data structures. So we are taking existing data structure and augmented by adding more fields, more attributes to each node. So here, I'll augment it so every node V store a counter, and this counter contains how many data points do I have in this subtree. Makes sense? So child 1 over here, its counter should point up to, right? In its subtree, the root that this guy is its subtree, namely corresponding to this quadrant 1, it has 2 data points, namely B and C. And now, in this code, instead of reporting the points, once I'm in this case that ROV is fully inside Q, I just return how many data points do I have here, and no need to closely visit each one of the children. I'm done with this subtree. Okay, what do I do if my shapes are different, like not points, like triangle, or any other geometric object? Again, every time in quad tree, I need to start by specifying what's the splitting policy. What will determine for a node V if V will be left alone as a leaf, or should we have children and it will be an internal node? That's a splitting policy. Remember, once we decide to split in quad trees, once we decide to split the outer square, it will always be in the middle of the X span and the Y span. Once we split in a quad tree, we ignore the data for not trying to balance the data. KD trees that we'll see later will try to be a bit more sensitive to the data. Why are we so insensitive to the data? Because it buys a lot of simplicity in the programming. We know for each region, it's either what are the sizes of each region. It's either the whole thing, or it's half of the whole thing, or a quarter. And there are just these many sizes, just these many for the region. And implementing it is so much faster, as well as the running time on it. Less checks implies faster running time. Okay, so now I have a set of triangles. I need to decide about the splitting policy. In general, we want to say if I have a region, and in this region I have a lot of data, I'll split it. If it has little data, in this toy example, little data means it intersects with at most one triangle. That is, if it intersects one triangle of the input or 0 triangles, I'll let it be a leaf. And if it intersects 2 triangles, then I need to split it. So here are my triangles, A, B, D, and C. The root says in my region there are 4 triangles, so I need to splitting always in the middle. Quadrant 2 has no triangles in it. Quadrant 0 has only A in it, so quadrant 0 just says keep a pointer to A. Of course, we don't store A itself, the same reason that we don't store triangles explicitly in when we stored triangular mesh. We just stored a pointer to the relevant data, so data will not be doubly stored for not running into concurrency issues. Quadrant 0 intersect only A, so it will point to A. That's what the lift will do. Quadrant D, very same thing, intersect only with D. Quadrant 1, remember this is not 13, it's 1, 3, 1, 2, 1. Quadrant 1 intersect both A and C, so we split it. Here it's 4 children, splitting always into 4 children, from which quadrant C, quadrant 1 needs to point to C, and as we keep splitting, there are a few more quadrants that points to A. So A is stored in multiple nodes, multiple lifts, and that's fine. But it's fine in the sense that it's more memory, of course, that we need to spend for it, but it's still a very practical data structure, especially if you're not trying to defeat it by creating a really miserable data for Quadtree itself. You can squeeze poor performances, but in practice, Google for Quadtrees and applications, for example, in graphics, for example, in robotics, for example, in geographic databases, or put it in different worlds. Hanan Summit, which was a colleague that was pushing Quadtrees for many applications, is on the board of Zillow. So let's probably say something. Everybody good with this data structure? And now a question that I like to ask in the exam is, assuming that every triangle is fully contained inside the leaf, can I use the painter algorithm to put it? That is, every triangle fully contains inside a leaf, and I don't have a triangle, as opposed to this example, that needs to span more than one leaf. Triangle A, again, needs to store in multiple leaf, needs to be split. But if every leaf fully contained a triangle, like triangle D over here, then it's a binary space partition. You always have a plane that, no matter where the viewer is, the plane separates completely objects that are further away from the viewer from objects that are closer to the viewer. You cannot create cycles in this part. So if you have a nice Quadtree, it also means that painter algorithm will work without needing to split anything. Answering a query, like finding all the triangles that intersect a query, completely analogous to how we did it, 4 points for a given query point. Now, what's cool is that how can I answer weight tracing? I shoot array and I want to find, like in homework 2, what is the first triangle that this ray hits coming from the eye, coming from the camera. So if I shoot a ray, I can see at which time this ray enters a region R of V, for example, the root, at which time it exits R of A. Everybody remembers? How do we represent array? I plus P times vector V. And every intersection point happens at this time. I can ask at which time does it enter and exit such a square. And since the square, that's a simplicity, since the square are all axis parallel, all you need to do for each one of them is treat each dimension independently. What happened in the x, independent of what happened in the y. So you're just asking for the x coordinate of V. Are you hitting the left core for the x coordinate at which time? Are you hitting the left wall at which time? Are you exiting the right wall? And the same for y's. And then it tells you at which period of time the ray is inside the quad of the quadtree, or the quad of the octree. I don't know if I can say. Quad of octree sounds funny, but anybody? It's an English question. We'll call it still a quad, even though it's octree. Again, why octree? Because we live in 3 dimensions. So we split by x, split by y, split by z. Every node has 8 children. Okay, so now when I find if a ray intersects a region, which is, as we said, very, very easy to check, very simple operations over here, much simpler than intersection of a ray and an arbitrary plane. You all know how to find where the ray intersects an arbitrary plane, but the planes that you have all here are orthogonal to either the x or y or z. So things are simplified in this equation. So you're saving quite some time. And now, what do I do? Here is my ray. I want to find the first triangle that this ray cross, that this ray hit. So I'm asking the root of the quadtree, hey, are you intersected by this ray at all? And if the answer is no, then this ray goes in the opposite direction. Obviously, it doesn't hit any triangle, and just go ahead. It doesn't hit any of the triangle in the R of A. So you checked it in the root. If it does intersect R of V, if the ray does intersect R of V, then at this point you do care, you are not arbitrarily propagated to all 4 children, you're propagating the ray to the first child out of the 4 children, the first child that the ray penetrates into, but which would be quadrant 2. And in quadrant 2, you're asking, hey Ray, are there any triangles in quadrant 2? But quadrant 2 is empty, so obviously there are no triangles. So I compute also at which point of time the ray exit quadrant 2, and exiting quadrant 2 in this case will mean it enters quadrant 3. Going to quadrant 3, hey Ray, are you intersecting D, the only triangle in this quadrant? No, so keep on going. You intersect this quadrant, that is when the ray exits, it enters quadrant 1, this guy, from which the first quadrant that it intersects is quadrant 1, 2, 1, 2, 2. I don't read it here. And in 1, 2, 2, does it intersect the only triangle, if it exists, in this triangle? And you find that, yes, it does intersect. Make sense? So you are marching from one quadrant to another. At each moment, if the quadrant is empty, great, then continue with the ray. It doesn't hit anybody in this quadrant. If it's not empty and it's your internal node, then you are checking in this internal node what comes first. So the quadtree also suggests at which order along the way I should check triangles and check quadrants until I either find hitting point or find that it finally exits without hitting anybody. Make sense to everybody? Okay. How you're traveling. Each time you want to stay as high in the tree meaning larger quadrants. I realize that quadrant 2 is empty, no reasons to waste time when I'm doing the ray tracing. Quadrant 3 is not empty, but it's a leaf. There is only a single triangle, one check out there. So, of course, this example has only 4 triangles. Think about millions of other triangles floating around, and most of them you don't need to bother at all for the ray. That's why quad 3 is so cool in making the ray tracing more efficient. Okay. And it's dynamic. You can insert a new triangle. How do you insert a new triangle? You decide that every leaf contains, say, 3 triangles. You have every leaf contains, say, a list of triangles inside this leaf. You're allowing temporarily for a leaf to contain 4 triangles, even though 3 is the right number. Temporarily, you allow it to have 4 triangles. Let's see it. This is a leaf region. It has 3 triangles already, which is fine for a leaf if my splitting policy is no more than 3. And I insert the 4th triangle, T4. So temporarily, this leaf has all 4 triangles. And then what do?
Split.
Then I need to split. Here was my tree. Here is the region of V, so this is R of V. And at this moment, V becoming a parent and has 4 new children. Corresponding for the 4 quadrants, always split in the middle. And what do I do with the list of 4 triangles? I just give the list, the whole 4 triangles, to each one of the children. And each one of the children says, hey, if this region doesn't need to store the triangle 4, T4, then I just don't store it. And of course, if it could cascade more, there might be more splits, because possibly I do have more regions that cause me to split further and further. So basically, you are saying that as long as all the coordinates are integers, then I don't need to go to sub-pixel resolution. That's like one way to limit how low in the recursion you need to go. Right? As long as every region contains the gap between every 2 triangles is at least 1 pixel, I never need to go below 1 pixel. Okay. Other splitting policies that make sense in this case is to say, as long as you intersect you need to split if you have at least 3 vertices, or at least these many triangles that intersect. There are a lot of vertices of other triangles, but when you don't have vertices of triangle in this region, probably you can leave it be. Okay. Quad trees are useful. Make this point clear. I can use them to store terrain. What is terrain? For every terrain is usually a function where for every point x and y, latitude, latitude, longitude, I have the elevation above sea level. Make sense? So just one value for every x and y. It's a function, defines all x and y. That would be the sampling the face of the Earth. And usually it will be sampled by giving you a lot of a grid of in DIM, digital elevation terrain. I'll have point I, j, and zij, how high you are above the sea level. And now you want to store it in a terrain, but you want to triangulate this terrain. But the beauty is, you can say, as long as there is no big change in my terrain, no big change for this triangle in the elevation underneath it, if I look at from standing on the mountain, looking below me on the XY plane, as long as all the points inside the region have more or less the same elevation, I don't feel any need to split it. I'll keep it as one triangle. If it's good enough approximation, I'll keep it as one triangle. On the other hand, if in the same XY region you see points that are here in the valley and here at the top of the mountain, big gap in elevation, then split it. The same rule of quad trees in this case. Make sense? So if this is a contour where you suddenly jump from sea level to being in the plateau way above the sea level, then you will have big quads where it's plateau, big quads in the sea level where it's plateau as well, and next to the boundary, you'll see a lot of tiny levels. Why are you splitting all these tiny triangles? Because each one of them contains grid points X, Y, Z that are very low, as well as grid points that are very high, which is make you to split it. Now, but said that our graphics doesn't like quads, at least in modern computer graphics, much rather prefer triangles. Not a problem. Here is a quad. Split the quad along one of the triangles, and now I have two big triangles, each with 45, 45, 90 degrees. So that's how I created from one quad of the quad tree two triangles. And that's cool. Now, should I go always for the finest, tiniest triangle, or should I use this approximation idea and store bigger triangle? That is, what would be my cue? My points just on the I show you the only the x value. There is also the y value that goes toward you. Here are the elevation, the z value, and roughly speaking, as long as I can describe all the data points as one triangle, one segment in my pool drawing, one triangle in 3D, and all my data points are either on the triangle, or maybe they are just barely on the triangle. The error that I have from each data point to these triangles that I decided to represent them are small enough. As long as all the points inside it are close enough to this triangle, this segment, let's just keep the segment as is, and I don't really need the fine details of the individual triangles. I can approximate all of them with one triangle. That's what you see over here if your tolerance of error is huge. You have very few triangles because every triangle fits a lot of data points that are very close, that are relatively close to it, but not very close. If I decrease the error message, if I decrease the error tolerance, then now I cannot have this point together with this point in the same triangle, and I'll just split it at the middle. So at x and half, I'll split it in the middle. So here is one triangle, and here is another triangle, each one that approximate these more refined points, both with smaller angle, with smaller error. So that will fit maybe this value. And if I decrease the error even more, this value. And if I decrease the error to 0, I'm going to the fine detail. Which of all these models should I keep out there? Well, we talked about it. Level of details, keep all of them. It's not much overhead. And once you're rendering the bunny, then depending on where the bunny in your field of view, how close and at which angle you see the bunny, decide at which level you have. But what's the new thing about this new level of details is that where do I store this bunny or this bunny? I store them in the quadtrees themselves. The root of the quadtree points to, here is summarization of the model where here is my quadtree, here is my rendering, I'm walking on the path of the quadtree, and if here is a node W, and if the level of details of the node of W quite high of the tree, so it's very crude, very few triangles, very approximated region. If the level of details of W here are fine, then use the very crude, the bunny with the 76 polygon. If you see that you need to go down the tree and now visits a lot of pieces of the bunnies or a bunny with more details, that would be lower in the tree. So the tree also tells you at the same time what is which of the bunnies to use during the creation of the image. And as think about interactive computer vision, interactive video games, you can decide which of the nodes, which of the bunny to use. As a viewer, the player gets closer to the bunny, you need to go to a more refined bunny because the errors are more noticeable and vice versa. Okay, we are done with quadtrees. Let's talk about other data structure that is very popular called R-trees. Very popular in geographic, geometric data structures. And you need to store objects, robotics, players that are moving, houses, and you want to support ray shooting, for example, or to store. Oh, I didn't mention it. There is another option of what do I store in W. I didn't tell you. We said 2 slides ago, at this point, what I stored in W was a 3D model of the bunny with some level of resolution. There is another way of what I can store here.
I was going to say distance to the bunny.
The distance will determine do I need to go down or not. For example, if the whole bunny is less than 1 pixel, that's the coolest example. If the whole bunny takes less than 1 pixel, then I don't really need all the level of detail. So no. But I need a pointer from here to something that will help me render the bunny. I can store a pointer to one of the levels of the bunny as a triangulated mesh.
So then every time you go to a different bunny, you just have a pointer to that bunny, and you start from there, and then you recurse down that bunny to see if you need to have more detail?
Yeah, I store data where the viewer is with respect to it, as well as what's a bounding box and the level of details, and then it tells me which level of details of the bunny do I need. And there are lots of other things in the quadtree. The bunny could be one of them. I'm making a bit salad here. But alternative to storing the triangulated mesh of the bunny that you'll use if you're using a computer game.
Imposters.
Everybody heard it? Let's keep an imposture. A few impostures from a few level or a few directions that we look at it. That is, we look at the picture of the bunny. We are rendering just the bunny itself. Pixels around it are transparent. And how large should the billboard of the bunny be? Once again, depending on how close or how far you are. you need very few pixels. That's again the idea of mipmap. If the bunny is very far away, an imposture that has very few pixels is probably enough. You need to get closer. Maybe an imposture by itself starts to be an obvious giveaway because the direction to the viewer doesn't exactly fit any of the direction of the imposture. We talked many times about occlusion between one piece of the bunny to another piece, or one tree to another tree. As well as, can a single imposture be a good representation, or should I have a few that stands out? An imposture from which direction, where is the viewer with respect to the bunny? Again, start just a few directions around the bunny, and that will give you a cool approximation. Yeah?
Is it imposter?
Billboard and imposture is pretty much the same thing. It's
like just a picture of the bunny? Is that what you meant, meaning? I'm sorry.
Picture, yeah. It's important topic, so let me bring you. Let's see if I can find the image on the fly. So in this case, classical example of storing an imposture of the helicopter, since there are objects that are occluding other objects, then I need to store a few planes, and there are a few things that could be with respect to each other. So it could be single imposture, a single 2D, or hopefully just a very small number, just a few 2D. There is an example that I played with multiple times of 2 rows of trees. So here it suggests which planes you can use and how to decide for each plane, each image, what object will be there. There is another example that I'm trying to pick, another classical example. How do I decide how many yeah, so we'll tell you how to that basically a single imposture is fine for one direction that I'm looking at, as long as there is no movement of relevant pieces. The moment that I want the propeller to allow to move, I put one plane of the propeller, one plane of the helicopter itself. And then I need to keep the helicopter from a few directions. But between one direction to another, I can easily approximate. Actually, the graphic hardware will massage the image a bit, handle the foreshortening, that as you are moving a bit, this side will become longer, this side will become shorter, but that's just how imposer behave. Yeah. Okay, R-trees. Different approach. Then quad trees. R-trees are arguably the most popular database out there, definitely for any geographic, any geometric object. And it's kind of analogous to B trees. B trees that you might know from data structural database is where you store just keys, one-dimensional data. And R trees are some extension of it to objects that lives in 2, 3 more dimensions. So what's the idea about R trees? Here is my bunch of triangles, let's say, and for each triangle, I can compute its bounding box. So I'll use a lot the term bounding box. I have a region, I can encapsulate it in various simple geometric shapes, and there are many papers about R-trees that suggest different shapes, essentially that try to be more snakes than just bounding box. But for simplicity, let's use axis parallel bounding box. So how do I find the bounding box for this shape? I'll ask what among every point, what is a point with the lowest y, the minimum y, the point with the max y, the same for the x, the same minimum x and maximum x, I'll get a rectangle. And that's my bounding box of this shape. And it's very, very fast. And it's very fast to check if two bounding boxes have a point in common, because we are just asking, do in their x value, are they overlap or not? And in the y value, do they overlap or not? So I have my set of triangles, and I compute for each one its bounding box, and I'll build a R tree. The R tree here is drawn so the root is at the bottom, the leaves are higher. And I decide about a clustering policy. I decide about two leaves, say 7 and 8, that I want to cluster together. So 7 and 8 will be clustered together, and meaning that in my tree, they'll have a common parent. 7 and 8 are clustered together, so I create a common parent of 7 and 8. And what do I store in the common parent? I'll store the bounding box of its children. We will just take from the two children what is the x, the max x of both of them, the mean x of both of them, same for y. That will give you the bounding box of the two children. And I decided to cluster these two children together. Similarly, I cluster 5 and 6 together into one bounding box, so they have a common parent. Similarly for 3 and 4, similarly for 1 and 2. And now I am done creating the level above the leaf, the parent of the leaves. And now I'm going to cluster these nodes, these bounding boxes. So what's the rule about clustering together? Well, in this example, of course, I do a toy example, but essentially you want to cluster things that are nicely close together. If two triangles are very close to each other, probably I want them in the same cluster. So now I take two bounding boxes, let's say 5 and 6 for this bounding box, 7 and 8 for this bounding box, and I'll build their bounding box. They decide to cluster them, so I create a common parent right here, and the node stores their bounding box, the bounding box of both its children. And same goes for the other subtree. And finally, I create a bounding box of the whole region. Again, each time merging together two bounding boxes. So now, as opposed to the quad tree, I can say the height is exactly log n. It's the easy part. It shares many things like the quad tree in the sense that if I have a query point, I give you a query point. I want to know if my query point lies on any triangle. What do? I go to the root, I ask him, query point, are you inside the query region, or are you inside the region of the root? If my query point is right here, the answer is no. If my query point is right here, the answer is yes. And then if it passed the test of the root for the query point, then I push my query for both children. I don't try to decide if it's only on the left child or the right child, especially that there is a good chance that the regions of the left and the right might have overlap, so I need to check both children. So I'll push the query point to both children, and that will push the query for both of its children. When do I reject the query? This bounding box for this query will say, I have nothing to do with this query. So you're not on any triangle in my region because the query point is far away from my region, and I only store triangle in my region. Right. So even though you're not guaranteeing that it's only log n to do point location, you hope that it's a great filtering process, right? That very soon, if your clustering mechanism makes sense, then you have things on the East Coast, things on the West Coast, and somehow they're separated from each other. And many of these things you don't need to check each one individually. Right? So that's the idea behind the R tree. And in the same way, you can have a query region, again, a query axis parallel region, and you want to ask who are the segments that intersect my query region. How do I do it? A query region, do you intersect the bounding box of the root? If no, then return nothing. If yes, then check for the root, check the two children of the root, and ask for both of them. Do you intersect the query region or not? And so on until you are down to individual leaf. That is, as long as your query region intersect ROV. Why? Because if this is a region of an internal node V with a lot of objects inside it, and here is my query region, and they are disjoint, then obviously none of the triangles here are relevant for the query region here. Quite obvious. And the reason that they are so popular is that because usually the nodes that you are visiting are relevant, at least have a good chance, and you don't need to visit too many nodes that has nothing to do with the query. And again, it's one of these answers that are like 42. It's a data structure that doesn't do one particular thing very well, but is good for many types of queries. Including, in the same way, ray tracing. You have a ray coming from the eye or coming from distributed ray tracing, maybe coming after you already hit the wall. You want to ask, does the ray hit any of the triangle inside this tree? Let's check first if the ray intersects the bounding box of the whole region. If not, then no. If yes, then what of the two children, left child or left child, does the ray intersect first as the bounding boxes? Check this quadrant first and continue when needed. Okay, so obviously you can do it. And when you have hierarchy of the cache, you have fast memory and slow memory. What you'll do is still use R trees, except that now you will not just cluster two triangles together. Let's even be anachronistic and think that you have a hard drive here where what really takes time here is the seek time. You need to move the head of the hard drive to a specific point to squeeze to get data. Then you need to wait until the write rec will arrive. So What does it mean? That the I/O time is quite long comparing to the CPU that works very well. Works very, very fast, much faster than fetching things from the hard drive. So what would you do then? You'll still use R3, but the degree of every node will not be only not only two segments, but it will be, say, 100 segments per node, 100 boxes per node. Why is this not slower? Well, it's slower in terms of CPU time. If every child have 3 nodes instead of 2, the time in terms of CPU is longer. But what really takes time here in this tree is not the CPU or the GPU. It's the time to upload, download things into the, to notice that something that I'm searching is in this part of the tree, and that's the part that I need to leave. That's the part where I need to do I/O, to bring memory from one part of the memory to another, to faster memory. And if I already bring some data, if I, at the same time that I can bring one key, 2 segments, I might bring 100 segments with the same time. Once I had the head of the hard drive, the tree gets to the right point, it's very fast to bring a whole bucket. So I bring a lot of data per one such I/O, one moving from one memory to another. And what do I get in return? That now the tree, what's the height of the tree? The height of the tree is, age is log of n, but log to the base what? When it was a binary tree, it was a log to the base 2, right? Because you have n leaves n level above them, there is n half level above, and there is n over 4, and so on. So after log n level, you're done. So it's log n for binary tree. But now if I store about 100 keys per node, then the height is log to the base 100 of n. And n is what? Let's say that n is a million. No, make it billion. Log of 10 to the 9, log to the base 100 of 10 to the 9 would be about 3. If the math works correctly, would be between 2 and 3. So in 1 or 2 very slow operations, you're getting to wherever you need. Make it 10 to the 12, make it 10 to the 15. No matter how many triangles you have, you're getting to where you got very fast. So that's a justification to have nodes that are relatively large. It's the same philosophy that are used in B trees, B plus trees, that you might have heard about in databases. Undoubtedly the most popular data structure in the world, and the same goes for geometric objects. Okay, one more tree to mention. By the way, in the whole chapter about accelerating data structures, we talked about geometric hashing. Then we talked about quad trees, we talked about R trees, and now we are discussing the third animal that are the KD trees. And all of them, by the way, are also sometimes example of BSP trees. R trees not so much, quad trees, and KD trees always split according to some plane. So they're all example of BSP. Yes, sir.
So in like a game or like a typical use case, would we really be like pulling stuff off the hard drive to like render a scene? I would assume that it would all be in memory, right?
Hard drive less popular today, but if you have a scene with that many trillions of triangles floating there, probably yes, and probably there are tests that tells you that are partition the terrain, do flight simulation, and you're moving from one region to another. And definitely if I'm moving, I can have a mountain represent red with more details or less details depending on how close I am to the data. So you will not use it instead of the Z buffer. But if your GPU can handle only these many triangles, and you have in your geometric sim many more of them, it helps you prioritize what moves into the GPU. The same goes if you have the fourth dimension, if you have the time involved. They are all moving objects, and depending on which time you are asking all of it. The same goes if each object is a trajectory, and you ask who are the people that I might hit at this point.
I think a game like Minecraft, it loads chunks from the drive actually, like as you move. So there are some games that, I mean, Minecraft, I think it's like 2 times larger than Air, so the map is really large.
I just downloaded a mod the other day that basically loads it a different way, so you can see really, really, really far. So that's correct.
Yeah, but the original, it just loads from the drive.
Yeah, but historically Minecraft, you can see only that many blocks away, especially for that reason. So your visibility region was limited to things that were only that many blocks away, very historically. Okay, one more data structure, KD twist. The terminology is horrendous, right? Because they are all type of trees, and it's no, the R doesn't stand for something that I know that can help you know that this is the type of the tree. Know about the 2D tree, or in D dimension it's called KD twist. Just remember that that's KD twist. So I have a set of points, and I want to do all the operations that we discussed before, like point location. I'll give you a point, tell me if I landed on one of the data points. Or I'll give you a region and tell me who lives inside the region. We didn't talk about nearest neighbor. I'll give you a point, and I want to ask, is region of 1 mile away from it? Does it contain anybody, any data point? When I replace it with triangles, it will be ray shooting, ray tracing. All these operations I want to do again, and the philosophy of KD tree is slightly different. So once again, I have the root. Once again, the root corresponds to a kingdom, the kingdom of the root, which is the whole world, the whole data outside. And once again, I need a splitting policy. Here, the splitting policy would be simpler. Would be I don't split only if I have one data point in a leaf. If I have more than one data point, I do split. But if I split in a quad tree, I split always in the middle. That is, the portion of the kingdom to my left equal to the portion of the kingdom to my right. I ignored the data completely once I decided to split. KD tree says, no, I will look at the data and I'll try to be fair to the data. What do I mean? I will split using a vertical plane, vertical line in 2D, and I'll make sure that the number of points, data points to my left equal to the number of data points to my right. Plus minus 1 if the number is odd, of course. Okay? The number of points to my left equal to the number of points to my right. So this line, these two dimensions don't have to be equal to each other. If I have a lot of data points to the left and very few to the right, then I'll split very close to the occupied part with many data points. So that was splitting by X. And now, if every region is a leaf, I'm done. That's not the case. A region is a leaf now, but it has a lot of points. If every leaf contains only one data point, I'm done. That's not the case, so I need to split again. How do I split again? I want to split fairly, and at this case, originally I split by a vertical line. Now I'm splitting by a horizontal line. So I look only at the data points to my right and split them using a horizontal line. That's only portion that this line has effect, so that the number of data points here equal to the number of data points here. And same go to this part. So again, first split was vertical, second split is horizontal. If I live in 3 dimensions, then now my next split would be based on Z. If I have only 2 dimensions, then I started with vertical, then horizontal, and now I'm back to vertical again. And looking at this subset, split it so you have 2 points versus 2 points. Balance of the data from the left and the right. The same goes here. Notice that these 2 segments don't align, as opposed to quad 3, because they are sensitive to the data points that they are trying to split. So what did you say? Vertical, then horizontal, then vertical. The next split would be horizontal again, and so on, round robin. And it's round robin of the dimensions if you have more than dimensions XYZ, 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 and so on. Okay, so that's KD3 in 2 dimensions, or sometimes just called 2D3. And so on, and beside it, it's just like quad 3 in all aspects. It's better theoretically, it has some advantages, it has more theoretical bounds, practically depending on whom you ask, which one is better, KD3 or quad 3. Good, but of course it also depends on the data, how well the data is balanced from the left and the right. And of course you can generalize it to other objects like triangles, that you will do your best to split them so you have the same number of triangles on the left and the right, and not too many crosses the splitting plane. So that would be our next data structure. Yeah, we can skip these details. What's the height? Nothing, not much to negotiate here, right? The height is log to the base 2 of n. You're always splitting by 2. And once again, I'll make this point. Again, you'll see this application a lot. You'll see KD3 a lot. They behave nicer in higher dimension, nicer than quad 3s, because it's still log n in higher dimensions. And you'll see them a lot in machine learning as a way, as a hack to find nearest neighbor. It will not find the exact nearest neighbor, but you massage them to, I'll give you a query point and you'll tell me among a cluster of cats and a cluster of dogs is a nearest point is cat or a dog, or in range of 1 around me, do I find more cats or more dogs, and do decisions instead. So you'll see KD3s very popular in machine learning applications together with other data structures for approximate nearest neighbors. And okay, I think that we're good with the trees, answering in KD3, very much the same. Yeah, theoretical bounds, we mentioned it. It's square root n, and you can finally prove something about the query time. The query time is at most square root n, but it's very, very, very pessimistic upper bound for the query time. It's usually way faster for any query. Again, your query better not be a disk. You much rather prefer a query that is axis rectangle square as well. Okay, and we should start with modeling probably. So we'll see some classical modeling. We'll also see newer and cuter ways for modeling. Modeling essentially, once you have a geometric shape in mind, you want the computer to be aware of geometric shape that you have in mind. Like, want to design a house and want to control the shape of the house using very few parameters out there. So you can play with vertices of the wireframe, for example. Or you can talk about other type of data that we try to control, like wireframe representation of a given shape, just to give you a 3D feeling about what's happening, or boundary representation with the faces, or very popular in medical data, what is a pixel in 3D called a voxel. So now you have a lot of voxels, and with the voxels you're trying to visualize this data, but your original data will be a lot of voxels, each one with, say, its water content. That would be what you're getting, say, from MRI. And you want to visualize it and to form boundaries and to show the bone, what separates bones from other organs. Wireframe representation talk for itself, just the edges of the polygon shapes that you have in mind, quite obvious. You can fill out the faces, and then you have the boundary representation of the object, volumetric representation, that's the input when I replace voxels with from wireframe of the voxels to assign to them opacity. Basically, you want to visualize medical data. The whole trick is you need to decide what values of voxels become transparent or semi-transparent or opaque completely, depending on what you want to see. A constructive solid geometry, very cool. If you haven't seen it before, quite cool way to increase shape. How do I describe a shape? Well, first I have library of very basic shapes, say square, cylinder, box. These are all the primitive shapes that I can work with. And I also have a set of operations that I get to define, like union or intersection, subtraction, all takes a complement between shapes that are created. Okay, all sounds very boring. Boolean operations that I can have between the shapes and the primitives that I have in my library. And now let's see how we are designing, how we can tell the computer about the shapes that we have in mind using constructive solid geometry. So that's a shape that I want my computer my CNC to generate. How will I tell it that that's a shape? I'll tell it take a box, take a cylinder, take the union of the box of the cylinder. Union, of course, I need to translate, rotate each one with respect to the other until I'm getting this shape. Take this shape minus this other box, and now I created this nook over here. Take this shape minus another cylinder right here, which will create a place for the axis to pass in this metal part. So, very cool. No? Boolean operations or primitives and Boolean operations. Between these primitives build this tree of sequence of operation, and you can pretty much generate a lot of big library of shapes out there. Okay, start with curves. We'll have a lot of curves, and to denote curves in general, or surfaces, I need a way to create curves, and using this curve, I'm going to also describe shapes like manifolds. But as far as curves, for example, just formality, you can speak sometimes about explicit form of z is a function of x and y. We don't like it. It's not very general. Z is a function of x and y. For example, how can I specify a sphere as z equals a function of x and y? A sphere as a function of x and y? I can't. I can specify half a sphere, like the half dome on the part, and then it would be something like z equals the radius minus x squared minus y squared. That would be one part or one semisphere, the part above the xy plane, and the other part would be the minus. Not very convenient to work with, but convenient for other applications. That would be an explicit representation of this surface. Implicit representation, much more general. What is a sphere? All the points for which what do I have for a point x, y, z? What is x squared plus y squared plus z squared over a point? It is what the distance of the point x, y, z from the 0, 0, 0, all of it squared. So where are all the points for which x squared plus y squared plus z squared minus a constant r squared equals 0? Where are all these points? What do they need to do to satisfy it? They need to be on a sphere. It's not a ball, it's a sphere, the skin of the ball. If I replace it with smaller equal, then it will be the whole ball. Equal to 0 here will just give me the skin of the ball. Right? What's the radius of this ball? The radius of the ball is not r squared, it's r. The r over here. That's great, but it's not very convenient for aligning images, texture with a sphere. So you have the image of the Earth, you want to put it on the sphere. It's never a great job, but if you do it, then you need UV of coordinate system of the sphere itself. So you can do it by specifying two values, theta and phi and theta, and now every point will satisfy cosine, sine. When you follow these guys, you can hit every point, and now you can map every point in a 2D plane to a point on the sphere. It will be much easier to digest when we'll talk about cylinders, or in general when we'll talk about surface of revolution, where all these equations will make sense. You're basically taking a curve and making it wind around the axis. Okay, to be continued. Good point. Thank you. I think that we have a few bureaucratic things to get, but yeah, all good. You'll have homework 5 out very soon for a pool with variables, about the pool reflection in metal pool out there with an environment with box mapping around the pool, and of course a lot of shaders. This would be homework 5. Okay. Okay, and we need to talk to decide about time for your exam, you think?